Welcome to the solution video for the Razor Pages to-do list challenge. This is part 2. So let's go right to our source code, which we already have started. So if you don't already have this, you need to go back to part 1 and complete that challenge. And that's where you should get this, where we have a class library, we have our database, and we have our front end. So in our front end, we have our pages, and we're going to create a new page. And this first one's going to be for completing our to-dos. Now, yes, I'm going to create a whole page for this. This is probably overkill, but it does work, and it will get the job done. In the future, I might come back here and look at maybe doing something with JavaScript or something else where I don't have to have a complete page, just to basically say, what do you want to change the value to? But this is a good exercise to do, so let's go to Razor Pages and create one, and this will be the complete to do. And once that gets created, did I hit cancel on that? It locked up on me. All right, took just a second to get going, but now we're on the same page. We got our application or our page done. And so I'm going to create a new parameter here. I'm going to have a prop, and this is going to be an integer, and it's going to be the to-do item ID. To-do ID. And let's actually make this just ID. Let's not worry about to-do. It's the ID. And then we're going to make this a bind property, singular, not plural. And we're also going to say supports get equals true. And what that means is we can create a link that has a question mark ID equals and a value like 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll get that value. Now I do want to say, let's do this right now, authorize. And this is what I should have done earlier. So let's make sure that I have this applied to all my classes that deal with to-dos. So create to-do, create to-do, there we go. Let's go authorize that and make sure we do control dot to add the using statement. And finally, my to-do list, we need to authorize this as well. So it's one of those things that I didn't add last time, but I need to. It still worked because I was logged in. But if I wasn't logged in, that would have been a problem. So with that, we know that we are going to be logged in. So we can now get not just the ID the user's given us, but also we'll get the user information from who's logged in. So what we're going to do is do a prop, and this is going to be a model from a to-do model. So let's say to-do model, control dot, add the using statement, and this is going to be our to-do item. And what that'll do is it'll allow us to load this to-do item based upon the ID they pass in. So on get, we're going to have to load information from the database. We're not going to pass the whole model around, and we're not going to trust that the user has the correct model. Therefore, we're going to need to make a call to our database to get all the information as long as their user ID matches. So let's do this. We can do one of two things. We can either do the same exact call, the read all, and then just get the ID that we want, or we can do a specialized read one. I think read one's probably better. So let's double click here, and I'm going to copy all this actually. And I'm going to create a new store procedure, and I'm going to call it sp to-dos underscore read one. Read by ID, probably better. Read by ID. I'm going to paste in right below. I can just remove that top line and say owner ID and at ID int. And now where owner ID equals owner ID and ID equals ID. And what that'll do is give us just one record back, and it'll be the correct record if there's any records at all. So with that being done, now what we can do is publish this. So we have those new changes, and then we can come back to our to-do, and it's going to look a lot like the list, a lot like this. So I'm going to grab this right here, and I'm going to paste it in right here. We'll have a few issues to deal with. First of all, we don't have that underscore SQL. So CTOR, inside here we're going to say iSQL data access, control dot, and call it SQL, and then do a control dot and add that field. There we go. Next we want to say that this is to-do item, and I grab just the first or default. So it doesn't return anything. We'll say just give us a default value, which is null for an object. Control dot here to add our using statement. And then not read all, but read by ID. And make sure that's what it is, read by ID. Yes, it is. So that should get us just one record back. So we're getting passing the owner ID in. We also need to pass in the ID itself. So we're going to say ID equals and to-do item dot is complete. But I'm not going to want a placeholder here. I'm going to say this is read only. I'm also going to have a hidden value here. So input ASP-4 equals to-do item dot ID. And this is going to be type equals hidden. And that way I can capture and pass back that ID value. Remember, this is a stateless connection. It's not going to remember my state between calls. Meaning it's not going to remember data in this code behind between calls unless I pass it back. So I'm going to say modify is my button type. Let's call it that. And now the only thing I can do is change. If you do the wrong one, like this create, then you might cause problems. But on the other side of it, it allows you to create some nice patterns. Update completion status. Because now my code looks almost identical to the other code that does something similar. There's a pattern to it. Okay, so the update is going to take in an ID, an is complete, and owner. So the ID is going to pass in as ID. The is complete is actually to do item dot is complete, and that should just say is complete is the name it gives it. We're going to make sure that's the case when we p-page equals dot slash, and then it is complete to do. That's the page name. Okay, that's this page name right here. Whoops. Yes, by clicking on it, it goes over to it. Bummer. Okay, so now we have that link. We still need to pass the ID in. Let's create the link name so we have a little bit of space here. So let's say mark complete, like so. But now, how do you pass that ID in? Well, there is an ASP-route-ID. You can say the route ID equals at model dot well, the to-do item is not marked as a bind property. So bind property. If you don't mark it as a bind property, you can't set the values of it. Let's try this again. Wait for it to start. Come over to our to-do list. Take out the trash can as marked as false. Let's mark it complete. So check the box and say modify. Now it's complete. It's true. Technically, you can go the other direction. Now it's false again, and this one is false as well. So it's working. It's a little weird to say mark complete, but it doesn't actually just say it's complete. But it change completion status is a little longer, but more accurate as to what it's doing. The idea here isn't a perfect application that does exactly what we want it to do, but more the application does the job that it was required to do. And that is the job. Yes, I would spend a lot more time on this to make it, first of all, nicer, but also to have better language, and maybe even to, like I said, eliminate this page or change how this page works. Maybe it's such a confirmation dialog. Do you want to complete this item? And maybe if it is already completed, it says, do you want to mark this item as no longer completed? And either way, it's just a button. That's it. So we could do that. And the way you do that is, if you go to the complete to do, make all of these hidden, and then just have just the modify button, and we'll maybe have a checkbox as well. Probably not. Nope, not a checkbox. And then have it say the message in here somewhere. And then when you hit modify, what's going to happen is in the code behind, it's going to say, if it's already set to complete, then uncomplete it. If it's already set to incomplete, then complete it. Okay, just kind of flipping that bit. So we're not going to do that, but that's how you would go about it. So let's close everything for now, and let's create another page. This one is to delete a to-do. This is going to look a lot like the previous one. Delete to-do. So let's go to our complete to-do once we have this, and we're going to basically copy most of the stuff in here. So in fact, let's copy it all, except for the name itself. There we go. And we have a constructor for the wrong type, wrong name. So we'll make that constructor correct. We also need some using statements. And the onGet is going to do the same thing. It's going to read by the ID. So it's going to figure out which to do it is. And then the post is just going to do the delete, which just takes in ID and the owner ID. So we don't need to have the is complete. And this is going to be delete. And it's going to return to the to-do list at the end. That's all the differences there are on the back end. On the front end, it's a little bit different. We need to have something similar to what we have here, but not quite as involved. So let's copy and paste this. And we're going to have the to-do item.id as hidden, and that's it. And in fact, we don't even have to have that. We can just say, let's grab the ID item. So all we need to have is a submit button. I'm going to leave it like it is right now and say delete. And this will be similar to what I was explaining before about you don't have to show them everything. You can just modify things behind the scenes. So let's just say we're going to have actually, you can do it outside of here and say paragraph tag, are you sure you want to delete this record? This record, I'm going to do a colon, and then say at model.todo item.to-do text. And then yes. We could have a no here as well that did something else, but I think yes is enough. And now what we'll do is we can go back to our list page and have one more of these. And we'll call this one delete. And it's not delete, complete to do is delete to do. And we'll copy and paste this as well and say delete. We could have one column and call it something like actions and then just list all the actions inside there, or you can have separate columns. I'm choosing for the sake of simplicity to have separate columns. Not that it's a whole lot simpler than just putting them next to each other. To-do list. Okay, so I'm going to delete, take out trash can because that's kind of silly. It's take out the trash, not trash can. Delete that. Are you sure you want to do that? Yes. Now it's gone. Now I can create a new to-do list that is take out the trash, which is different, and say add to-do item, and now I have that one as well. And I can go ahead and mark that as complete. and it is complete. So there we go. We've now made sure that the user can delete to-dos and complete to-dos, and that they can only do that on their own to-dos. So you can't do it on somebody else's to-dos. So if I were to log out here and then go back to home, go to to-do list, I can't get there. To-do list and create don't allow me to go there. So I have to log back in order to do anything. And once I do, I can see my list of items. Now, just to verify this, let's do one more thing. Let's register another user. admin@admin.com. PWD12345, period. Yes, same password. That's not a problem. And I'm going to confirm my account, and now I'm going to log in. Oops, forgot the period at the end. I gotta remember myself as well. And log in. If I go to to-do list, it's empty. There is no to-dos in this to-do list because I'm logged in as admin at admin.com, not as Tim at IamTimCorey.com. So it has separated out the to-do list. Now let's elevate this user, which is still not an admin, even though it's called admin. Let's elevate this to be an administrator. So now that we're done, we can move on to the bonus challenge. And that challenge is to, first of all, elevate someone to an admin user, which we'll do, and then allow only admins to be able to say how many to-dos each person can have before they reach their max. We're going to limit that per person. So let's start with elevating a user to an admin level. So let's pin this open. And we have our to-dos. We also need to have our other database. So let's go to appsettings.json. And it is called ASP.NET-Razor to-do. That's this one right here. And then inside here we have our users. Let's go to users first and go to view data. Let's close all but this. Then we have our admin and we have Tim at IamTimCorey.com. I'm going to elevate this user. Okay, so admin at admin.com. So let's create the role for this user. Now, you can't really add it through the front end by just saying view data and adding a new record because of the fact you need to create this ID. But not to worry, if you right click on the database itself and say new query, we can create our own insert statement. Insert into dbo.aspnet roles. And the control J allows us to have our IntelliSense. We need the ID, the name, and the normalized name. And the values is get, oops, not get, it is new ID. There we go. New ID. That's going to get a new GUID for us. And then we're going to say the name is administrator, and the normalized name is all caps, administrator. Like so. And now we're going to run this. Don't run the green play button up here. That runs your application. You want the green play button down here, which is execute. That creates that one record. We can close this out. Don't have to save it. If we refresh our roles table, we now see that we have a new role, and that role is called administrator, and there's the GUID for it. So now we can go to our user roles table and say view data. We can take the GUID from our user, our admin. We can paste it in here, and then the GUID from our roles and paste it in the role ID. And now we have that linkage that says that the admin at admin.com is an administrator. Now that that's done, we can close out of these things. And that, let's just check, make sure it's administrator, which is singular. Okay. So now we can create a new page. And let's call this page the, this is the page that's going to, let's say add. It's going to be the page that modifies the user permissions, or user management, I guess is probably the best thing to call it. User management, like so. And we'll hit add. And we're going to make sure that this page is authorized. So we're going to say authorize, control dot to add a user statement. But they're going to say roles equals administrator. And we need to put that in quotes. So I need to, there we go. So only the administrator. And let's just try to go there as an administrator, and then let's log out and log in as Tim and make sure that Tim can't go there, because admin is currently logged in. So user management says access denied. Oops. So that's not good. Now, if you're familiar with MVC, it would seem like I followed the right conventions here and said roles equals administrator. But it's a little bit different for Razor pages. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a policy for this. So let's go to our startup.cs and come down here to configure services. And let's say that in here, we're going to say services.add authorization. And then we're going to say options, lambda expression. And then inside here, we're going to configure some options for our authorization. And one of those options is to add a policy. And that policy, let's call it require administrator role. So you have to be an admin role. That's the policy. And then we're going to say policy lambda expression, policy.require role administrator. Now that's, make sure you spell it right, because that is just a string. So we've now created a new policy that we've added to our authorization that says the policy is require administrator role. I'm going to copy that. And it says for this role, we're going to require that you have the role administrator. Now, if we come back over to user management, instead of roles equals, we can say that the policy equals require administrator role. Okay, so it's going to apply that policy to this authorized attribute. So not just you're authorized, but also you're in the administrator role. Now, the reason for this is because we're using the bare minimum of what this can do. There's a lot more flexibility here. Now, if we go to user management, we still get an access denied. And I think we still have one more thing we need to do, and that is if we come over to the startup and look, here's where we're configuring the default identity, and this is where we say required confirmed account, and then we add entity framework stores for this. One more thing I think we need to do in here is we need to add in the fact that it has roles. So add roles, and the role is identity role. And what this will do is we'll say, okay, you're allowed to have roles. The other thing is we might need to log off and log back in, because what's happened is it's saved our credential information and it won't have that associated with our login. So with that being the case, let's do this. Let's start it up again. The first thing we're going to do is log off as admin. So log out, and now we're going to log back in, admin@admin.com, and our password. Log in, and now we can see our to-do list, which has nothing on it. Let's create one thing, admin to-do item. There we go. Now let's go to user management, and we can see the page. There's no unauthorized listing here. Okay, so now if we log out and go to user management, it takes us to this login page where I can say tim@imtimcorey.com. Same password, log in, access is denied to this page, even though I'm logged in. And even though the roles are set up properly, I don't have access to that role because I'm not an administrator. So it took a couple of steps to do that. Let's actually log out and log back in as administrator, since that's the next thing to do. Now remember myself. So there's a couple steps to do this. We had to add the roles and say, yes, use roles in the startup page. We also had to add this policy that says, hey, require the role administrator for this policy. And a policy, like I said, a policy can have multiple things in it, not just the one that we're doing. We could be a lot more granular in what this policy can do. So for example, we could even say require role and then give it another role. So in order to be the required administrator role, you have to be administrator and you have to be, I'm not sure, power user. But that way you can have more than one group required. So there's a lot of things you can do here, but those two things are required. And then over here, we say, let's apply the policy instead of the role. And that just gives us more power when it comes to how we deal with these roles. Now, maybe, I think you might be able to just do role equals as long as you log off and log back on. But I'm not positive. Let's just try it. Role equals administrator. Roles equals. Now you run this. And we go to the user manager page and we can see it. Let's log off and log back in just to make sure. Oops. admin@admin.com. And we can still go to the user management page. So you can use roles if you want. You still should put the in startup.cs, you should still put the add roles here and make sure you log off and log back on. But this allows you more granular. So either way is possible. It's up to you which one you want to do. I'll leave both in here. So now we have this challenge of how are we going to display information about the users here. Well, I think what we need to do first is go to our database. We need a new table. So add a table, and we're going to call this table users. And the ID will be a primary key, and it will be identity. And then we're going to have our user ID. That's an nvarchar 50. We're not going to allow nulls. And then we're going to have the permitted to do count. And this will be an int. And we're not going to allow nulls. We're going to default it to 0. And what we're going to do with 0 is we're going to say if you default to 0, or if you have a 0, then you can have as many as you want. But if you have more than 0 in that list, then we're going to say that's the cap. That's the maximum number. Now we could create something here where when a user gets created in the user table, that it then gets added to this users table as well. But I think we'll just do it manually. We're not going to try and create this massive application. We're trying to focus in a few pieces here. So I think this is enough for what we need. And then what we need to do is we need to have a couple of store procedures. So add a store procedure, sp users underscore read all. And then in here, we don't have to limit this because only administrators can call this. So begin, set no count on, end, and then what we're going to do is say select star from dbo.users. And then we're going to do our refactoring here. Whoops, scroll the mouse. Refactor, and then expand wildcards. There we go. So now we have those. We have the read, and then what we need to do is have a store procedure that allows us to modify that number. So sp users underscore update. And this is going to be based upon the ID of the user. It's not going to be the owner ID or user ID is a string. It's the ID, this ID right here, the unique entry for this table. So the ID, and we're going to have the, what do we call it over here? Permitted to do count. So permitted to do count, also an int. Let's begin, set no count on, and then we're going to say update dbo.users permitted, set permitted to do count equal to permitted to do count where, don't forget that where clause, where ID equals ID. End. And with that being done, we now have an update statement as well. So let's do our have an int for permitted to do count. Let's create another property, user email. And let's go over to our table design and say user email as well, which is n varchar. 50 is a little short. Let's make it 100. Not going to allow nulls in this one. And we're going to need to modify then our read. And this is going to be our user email. Like so. And now with those two being done and our model being updated, I should publish again. Notice how easy that is just to do. And then what I'll do is I'm going to first start on my user management by doing a get for all the users. So let's start a constructor. And in this constructor, we need an iSQL data access. Control dot to add the using. Call it SQL. Control dot to add our field. And then in here, I also need a property. So prop, and it's going to be a list of user model, control dot, and then we're going to call this users. So users equals SQL.load data user model. And the store procedure is dbo.sp_users.read all, underscore read all, not dot. And the parameters, it doesn't have any, I don't believe. Let's verify. No parameters, that's awesome. Makes it easy. So new empty object. And that's it. Oh, except for a to list, I believe. Yep. Nope, that returns a list, so that shouldn't be a problem. So what's the, oh, it's yellow because it's this next one. Dynamic. I always forget that. Okay, so now I have my onGet getting my list of users. So the first thing I do is probably display that list of users. But I'm going to try something a little bit different. So let's do this. Let's do a property here. User model. We're going to call this that's who's logged in. So for each user in model.users, we can loop over and create a form for them, just like we have. Let's go to the create page here. I'm going to take this form and just copy it. I like to have a structure there, and then I can make some modifications. So this is going to be for user dot, oops, lowercase u, user dot, probably helpful is to call it u. I know that normally I like to have better names in this, but this allows me to properly say what it is. So for u dot, the problem here is that I really can't or shouldn't create a post for every single user. And so it's going to give me some problems doing that. I think we need to rethink how this page works and not just say, hey, we're going to do the same way we've always done it. So let's take a step back and look at what we could do. I think we should do is strip out this for each and have a form control like this. But instead of having multiple things here, I think we should have maybe just a drop down and then allow the admin to say, here's how many they get. Maybe up above, we specify, so maybe do a for each up above. So let's, for now, comment this out and say, let's start with just a for each. Whoops. You can start with an @ symbol. For each u in model.users. And then we'll do a, let's just do a really simple, we're going to do a break at the end. So we're going to say u dot, and we have our list. Let's say email address, not user ID. I thought for sure I selected email address. And then parens, we're going to say u dot, and and let's get the number here, the permitted to do count, like so. But it's saying, hey, that's not right. Let's do this. Let's use a string builder. It's probably the best way of going about it. So just say at, and then put in double quotes, and then at the end put double quotes, and oops, not at, $. There we go. And then in here we can put our curly braces around our actual items, like so, and put our semicolon. And actually now we shouldn't need a semicolon. So it's saying you want a semicolon, but I don't think we do. Let's try and start without it. This is the problem with mixing razor and not razor. So I think we need to do here is actually wrap this in an at and put our parens around it so that it goes, oh, okay, I get what you're doing here. And because we're mixing HTML and not HTML and trying to guess which one is which, using this at in the parens allows us to say everything inside here is C#, just deal with it. And so now it should be that we can, whoops, we need to actually put some data here. So let's go to our SQL Server Object Explorer. I have DBO users selected here. Let's say view data. And let's also go to our EF data and go to our users as well and say view data. So we have, oops, not EF. Wrong database, Tim. Not EF, it is RazorDB. There we go. The EF data is from our Timco Retail Manager series. So users, view data, better. So now I'm going to grab the GUID from admin and come over here. I'm going to say user ID, that's the one, permitted, let's just say leave it default, and then admin at admin.com. And then let's grab Tim and say, oops, I'm going to escape that. I meant to capture this, the GUID. There's the GUID, and Tim at I am timcorey.com. And they're both zeros for now. All right, so with those two being done, they're now unlimited. That's what we're going to start with. We're going to allow the administrator to modify that later. You know what? Let's put a value of 5 here. That way we can at least see that it does have varying values. So now it should show up in this list, and we can at least see what each person is limited to. Now, his limits don't apply yet, but at least we have the limits being displayed in theory. All right, forgot to put the break point at the end, or the break at the end, but Tim Corey has 0 and admin has 5. So let's put our break at the end. That's going to put a new line each time. We could get fancy and say if it's 0, then say unlimited, but I'm not going to do that. Okay. You know what? Boy, I am going to do that because I'm just that kind of guy. I hate to have things partially done or say, well, you could do this. So if the u dot permitted to do count equals 0, then you're going to do this. And let's just take off the number entirely. And we're going to have an else here. And we're going to say the number in parens. Now when we run this, it should be that it doesn't show a number at all for, I believe, Tim, because Tim has unlimited. And there you go. So Tim has unlimited, but the admin only has 5. So there's a little bit of a tweak for you can do. So now we have this list. Down below here, what I want to do is create this, this idea of a drop down that allows us to say, okay, for Tim, I want to change that to 3. Okay? So let's start off by getting the data we need to have on this page. So we have this users list, But I'm going to create another property, and this is going to be a list as well, but this time it's going to be select list item, control dot to add that using statement. So select list item, so it's a specific type that comes with .NET Core. And we're going to say this is the user info or user drop-down data. It's a little more descriptive. And then when we load this list, we're going to do a for each on users and say for each one of these, we're going to say user drop-down data dot add new select list item. And we have a couple of values here that we're going to add. We're going to say text and value. So text is going to be what gets displayed to the user. And that's going to be u.user email. And the value is going to be u.id. That's the ID of that particular record. Now it has to be toString, so toString like so. So now we have as user drop-down data. We can come back over here. Let's uncomment this. And let's fix it. There we go. And say we're going to have a select. So let's get rid of both of these for now. And say we're going to have a select when ASP-items equals model dot, and our list was called the user drop-down data. User drop-down data. That's our list. And this is going to go into ASP-4, and that's going to be going to be the an int, and it's going to be the number of items to modify. So it's the permitted to do count. Okay, so that's a new permitted to do count. So we can say, let's add an input. The ASP-4 equals model dot permitted to do count, and just going to compare it here to what URL parameters that we have. We shouldn't have any, but user management. It's kind of a trick there. So claim type, we still want, do we want that? No, we don't want that. We don't care about that. And it's not SP to dos, it's SP users underscore update. And the update values are going to be the ID and permitted to do count. So the ID is going to be the ID to modify. So ID equals ID to modify. And we'll try it again. Okay, so I have a drop down here with nothing in it. That's awesome. And then I can modify my user. Let's just put a breakpoint here and see if it actually has any data coming through. So say modify user, and ID to modify is null, permitted count is 2. So that's working. We just need to figure out why our dropdown isn't working. All right, so let's look through what's going on here. So let's put a breakpoint at the end and make sure we're populating this, this value for user dropdown data. Let's run this. And once it runs, let's go over here in user management, click the page, wait for it. Oh, it paused my breakpoint. User dropdown data. If we look at the locals window, this, and look at our user dropdown data, we can see we actually have 2 values. I am Tim Corey, and we have admin value of 3. I'm sorry. Yeah, value is 3, value of Tim is 4. That's the ID from the database. So that's not it. So how else can we do this? Let's see what else we can do to figure out what's going on. Instead of a list here, let's do a select list, like so. Let's see if this makes any difference. Actually, we can't even do this assignment here. We're going to have to come down here. Let's put our breakpoint, not a breakpoint, our comment, our code, and put instead, we have to say select list, oops, user dropdown data equals new select list, and pass in our list, which is users, and then pass in our ID and user email. Those are the 2 columns we want, the ID being the value and the user email being the text to display. So that's who's going to pull the 2 properties. Now, we can also do the name of here. So we could say name of, and then say what's it called. This is a user model. So user model.id, and then here we can say name of user model dot user email. That gets rid of those magic strings and allows us to use instead the names. So if we ever refactor, we can change that. Let's see if that makes any difference. We already know that we're loading the data properly. And if you go to user management, it's still an empty list, even though there's data up above. So we're still loading the data correctly. But there's something else going on. So let's look at our HTML itself. And one of the things, let's see, we have ASP-items. That's the items list. We have ASP-4. That's what it's going to put into. The one thing I see here is we have a self-closing tag. And this is one of those weird, quirky things in HTML. Sometimes it requires you to actually have a closing tag. Let's try it again. And go to user management. And there we go. So now we have admin and Tim. Let's change Tim's value to be 3 and hit modify. And see what happens. Oh, we're going to hit a breakpoint here. So let's look at ID to modify is 4. Permitted count is 3. So let's run this. And it's going to come back to this page. And now Tim is at 3. Let's change Tim again to be 4. Modify, now it's 4. Tim, back to 3. Back to 3. And admin, let's set it to 0. And now it takes away that value. So quick and dirty, but it does work for us. So let's stop this now and move on to the last step, which is to actually make these apply. To do that, we're going to have to look up in our our create to do. So whenever we create a to do, instead of just saying, go ahead and create that to do, what we'll need to do is we need to check first to see if we are at our max for our to dos. So let's create user ID equals, let's just do user ID instead of owner ID. So grab the user ID, so u dot permitted to do count. There we go. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put in parens here, select, and we're going to do a count of 1. Whatever that value is doesn't really matter. But count 1 from dbo dot to dos, where user ID equals user ID. And I believe it's is it user ID or is it owner ID? Let's look real quick to make sure we have that right. It's owner ID. So where owner ID, and let's just alias that just so we're clear here what that is. And what this should do is it should return for us a count of how many values or how many rows are in this table that match this criteria. So we're going to say as total used. That sounds total to-dos. That's better. There we go. So we have permitted user to-do count and total to-dos. End. So what this will do is it will give us two numbers. One is how many they can have, and then the other is how many they have. Now, it's not telling us yes they can, no they can't. We have to do that logic on our own. We could do a subtraction here, but I think that this gives us what we need. So can create, let's close all but this. Let's come to our models up here and create a new model. And this model is going to be the user can create model or can create to do model. Can create to do. That's better. And we have permitted to do count. So int permitted to do count. And then the other one is total to do. Is the user ID. So user ID equals, and that's our user ID, which we already know. It's right here. Like so. And that's all we need to pass in. Oops. We don't need that parens down here. And let's put a line break here. And here as well. Then we'll put a first or default at the end of this because we only want one record. Now, we're going to have an if statement here. If can create dot total to-dos is greater than or equal to can create dot permitted to do count. This is where we have a problem. So if you've done more or the same equal to the total you're allowed to, then we need to say, nope, can't do that. Let's redirect you back to the same page. And to do that, we're going to say return page. But first, we also want to give the user some type of message. So let's do this. Prop string error message. Really simple stuff here. And we're going to say that before we return page, set error message equal to you have reached your maximum. Try to make sure I spell it right. Maximum number of to-dos. Like so. And then we'll make sure we actually show that on the page somewhere. So let's do an if statement here. If the model in place, it should be, as long as I haven't messed anything up, and the odds are pretty good that I messed something up, but as long as I haven't, then it should be we can't add more than a certain number. So let's go look at our numbers here. So admin can add as many as they want. So let's say 2. So I'm logged in as admin, but admin still has restrictions. So my to-do list right now has 1. So I create a to-do, test to-do, add that, and it says, hey, I can't find that procedure. You know why? Because Tim didn't do a publish to the database. Wait for that to work. Take a couple seconds here. It's done. Let's try it again. Okay, so it's still limited to 2. My task list. Now let's say test to do. So now I have a test to do. No big deal. I have 2. That's fine. And now I'm going to create a to do test 3. You've reached your maximum number of to dos. So saying, hey, you can't do that. Notice it's filled it back in because we've gone back to this page and said, nope, can't do that. Our to-do list only has 2 items. If I go over here and say, well, actually admin can have 3. Now I can come to create to do, say last one, and it goes to the list. But I go to create 1 more, and it goes, no, you can't do that because you're out of space. You only have access to have 3 to-dos. If I delete 1, then I can say 1 more, and it's on the list. And that is how you perform the bonus challenge. So the primary challenge was to have that delete and complete options. We have those. And the bonus challenge was to have that admin section where we can limit per user how many you can have. And we did that and verified that yes, it does limit how many you can add to your to-do list. Okay? I hope that that was stretching for you. I hope it kind of pushed the boundaries of what you know about ASP.NET Core Razor pages, and hopefully you learned a lot from it. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.